Please continue to recite the Mani mantra quietly to yourself and without distraction. And so today we completed the 100 million Mani mantra accumulation retreat. And we are extremely fortunate for that. It's really a great merit, because normally, of course, we do our best to practice virtue, to practice the Dharma. That's, of course, excellent. But then if we actually practice the Dharma together in a group, which we call a Sangha community, if we are reciting mantra together, if we are accumulating mantra together, then the merit is much more vast. In one of our prayers, we always say the blessings of the undivided Sangha. And so that is also what's meant with that. So, for example, now we have recited 100 million mantras, and let's say there's 500 people practicing together for 4 days. So maybe you're able to accumulate 100,000 on your own. But if you're practicing together with the Sangha community, then if 100 million mantras are accomplished, then you actually receive the benefit of having accumulated 100 million mantras instead of just the 100,000 that you've actually accumulated. So basically the virtue multiplies. It becomes much more powerful if we practice together. And that's why you should rejoice in that, rejoice in this accomplishment, and continue to practice with great joy and delight. So generally, when we practice virtue, it is that a defining characteristic of virtue is to do something good with a delightful and joyful mind. So happily and joyful to engage in practice. So rejoice in that, and also in your mind, make vast dedication prayers. So pray that temporarily in this world, that all disease and famine and wars fighting is pacified, and that ultimately all sentient beings become liberated from the suffering of samsara, and that they ultimately attain the state of enlightenment. So it is important to have a really vast intention, because the more vast your intention, the greater is actually your virtue. And so nowadays in this world, we are in the midst of really negative times, really dark times. Since the year 2020 until now, 2021, and this whole year has been extremely difficult. And the society, this entire world has encountered so much suffering due to that disease. So many people became sick, and many people died, and many people worried, for example, about their liveliness, their business, and so on. So this year really destroyed all of our happiness. So actually, to practice 100 million Mani mantra accumulation retreat in such evil times is actually even more beneficial. It's so beneficial, especially because it is especially important or significant in times such as these, where people encounter so much suffering, so much misery. And of course, also these evil times also arise due to karma. And so this is our collective karma. And then also we have collective merit. But so it's due to our collective negative karma that we all were, this had an impact on all of us. We all encountered really a lot of hardship. And on the other hand, also we have accumulated a lot of merit. And so first of all, the more vast, broad your motivation is, the greater will be the benefit. And so now, having practiced the Nobulchen raising the Great Compassionate One's Mani mantra retreat, we have done so with the happiness of all sentient beings in mind. And so that is one. And then on top of that, also, we are in the midst of the Sakadawa month, which is a very special month in the Tibetan tradition. It is said that during this month, all one's virtues are multiplied by 100,000 times. So actually, in the Tibetans give it that name, the multiplier month. And so therefore, if we accumulate 100 million mantras in this time, then actually those 100 million would be multiplied by another 100,000. So the merit really becomes inconceivable. And also, this is not something, a new thing that someone kind of came up with, something that is kind of a contemporary idea, but actually it exists since the Buddha himself was alive. When the Buddha was alive already, there was these 100,000 multiplier months and so on. And so this is, for this reason, ever since, a very special time. And now we were able to complete 100 million mani mantras during this time. And also at other times we practice the Amitabha 100 million mantra accumulation. And also this practice, so the mani accumulation and the Amitabha accumulation, both are not a contemporary new inventions of practice, but they have a very old and ancient tradition actually in Tibet. In fact, ever since the Buddha Dhamma even began to spread in Tibet, ever since there already was this tradition of practicing the Amideva and the Mani 100 million mantra accumulation. So this is a century-long tradition that has been upheld by the monasteries and also by the common people all over the place. Everyone really fully followed, upheld this tradition. It's an excellent tradition. And so now we are able to do these retreats, also the Amideva, and especially now the Mani mantra accumulation in Western countries too. And that is so significant because these days, these times are extremely unfortunate. And on top of the misfortune that we already are in the midst of, sentient beings, people are very distracted nowadays. We are so distracted by everything. Even when we do our job and whatever activity we do, we are wasting so much of our time. And obviously the mind is constantly flustered and all over the place. So that being the case, in that time, being able to do this, to practice a 100 million Mani mantra accumulation retreat is really an inconceivable, a great merit, and we are so fortunate. And the 100 million accumulation that we have together accumulated is all of our shared merit together. And so then in the end, also, we should dedicate this merit accumulated for all sentient beings so that they will become free from suffering and achieve happiness and ultimately attain the state of enlightenment. So today in the teaching, we come to the fourth of the four immeasurables, the immeasurable equanimity. So we spoke about love, immeasurable love, compassion, and joy. And so now equanimity. And so regarding equanimity, so normally in our minds, in our kind of default state of mind, we have all kinds of feelings and graspings and fixations in our mind. So for example, when love arises and there's this feeling, a feeling of love, or when you cultivate immeasurable compassion, then there's this feeling of compassion, or there's this feeling of joy, or there's also they're opposites, the opposite of love. For example, a wish to harm others, or of compassion, hatred and anger and aversion, or the opposite of joy is to a dislike against others and so on. So there's basically different feelings arising in the mind. And so what sets the equanimity apart is that when one cultivates immeasurable equanimity, one doesn't actually become controlled by any such a feeling. One doesn't follow a feeling. The mind just abides in a restful state. So if one is able to stay in such a state, then one is in a state of equanimity. And so Thich Nhat has said that this feeling of immeasurable love is like seeing a cute baby, and the feeling of immeasurable compassion is like seeing a person with leprosy, and the feeling of immeasurable joy is like reuniting with a loved one that one hasn't seen for long. And then immeasurable equanimity is this state in between two. So, for example, there's in between two feelings. So there's the feeling of happiness, and then it's opposite, the suffering, or attachment and aversion. So in between them. So basically, at the time when they are absent, in their absence. So, and then our prayer that we always recite on the four immeasurables about equanimity, it says, may they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion, without any bias toward closeness or distance. So mind that, an equanimous mind is a mind that is free from attachment and aversion. So that's really the essence of it. So normally we always divide everything into things that we like and things that we don't like. So we say, this is good and this is bad. This is my friend, it's my parents, and you are attached. We're attached to our own side. And then if there's someone that we don't really like and who's doing things that we don't really agree with, then we say, oh, this person is not good, it's bad. And then if that person is, you really dislike that person, for example, maybe because that person hurt you, harms you before, then you call that person, that's an enemy. Then you have a real resentment against them. And then if it's someone that is dear to you, then you consider them as good. So basically, we are either perceiving people as our friends or as our enemies. We are attached to our own side and have an aversion against the other side. And so this is what needs to dissolve, and these sides of attachment and aversion. So that's meant with, may they abide without attachment and aversion in a state of equanimity. So now, the other few days we talked about the need of having love and having compassion, also for oneself and for one's own side. And of course, there's something good to it, and we need it. We need to have love, and we need to have compassion for our own side as well, of course. But now, according to the Dharma, it is not only our own side that we need to cultivate love for, but also all others. And also we need to cultivate compassion, not just for ourselves, but also all others. So if we divide people in this way, if there's a division between enemies and friends, then that does not accord with the Dharma. So we have to dissolve these thoughts of attachment and aversion and make everything equal. So for example, in democratic countries, we speak about equal rights. So for example, there in those countries, male and female have equal rights, or different ethnical groups have different rights, or different religions all have equal rights. So everyone has equal rights. And so that's basically, that is equanimity. It's this equalness, yeah? And it's not just lip service, not just something that we say. So in a country, countries really do have equal rights for male and female, for different nationalities, for religions. They don't just say that, it's not just lip service, but there actually is such a thing as equal rights. So the mind of equanimity of the four immeasurables is just like that. And we need to have this equal state of mind that is free from the thoughts of attachment and aversion. And so now, the fault was the fault that comes from attachment and aversion eliminated. through cultivating those 4 immeasurables, so training in them. Because if we are not able to eliminate them, and then the way we always think, of course, we all know that attachment and aversion are bad. So we don't think they're not good. But so we know, for example, being angry, having negative thoughts, and speaking in a rude way, and so on. We all know that this is not good. But even though we kind of know that, actually at the essential point, the key point, that when it actually comes to our own mind, is something that we haven't really fully comprehended. Because for example, when we hear somebody speak nicely, then we can easily decide, oh, this is good. What they said is good. But when they say something negative, then we can also decide, oh, this was not good. So we can determine that. But when it comes to our own mind, often we cannot see really if those thoughts that arise are actually good or negative. So sometimes we have good thoughts in the mind, and then sometimes we have negative thoughts in the mind, like thoughts of wanting to harm others, and so forth, just negative thoughts about others, or we speak badly about others, and so on. And often, really, we are not able to see the fault in ourselves, in our own thoughts, in our own actions. And so this term equanimity, so in Tibetan it's dangyum, and dang means to send away, to give, to do away with something. So we need to send away, do away with our attachment and aversion. And then when we work on that, then a mind of equanimity arises. And when equanimity arises, then that's when we actually will see the nature of our mind. So therefore, in order to see the nature of the mind, a state of equanimity is really a prerequisite. Without that, we cannot see the nature of the mind. So therefore, first we need to make an effort in dissolving, letting go of all these thoughts of attachment and aversion and so on. Because if we don't, then then there is this fault that we have, and if we don't give up this fault, then we cannot see the nature of the mind. So, so normally what we do is that we see the faults in others, but we are not able really to see our own faults at all. So what we actually need to do is to, like, instead of looking at the faults of others, we need to point the finger at ourselves and really look at our own mind, like what is arising in my own mind, all these thoughts of aversion. So these faults is something that we need to see by really taking an honest look at ourselves and seeing that clearly, make an effort in reducing them. So normally we don't really think that way. We are so conditioned to think that, for example, a person that you really like, and naturally anyone that we really like, we just can't see their faults. For example, no matter what they do, actually, if we like them, no matter what they do, we will think what they do is great. Even if they're actually making a mistake, we will not be able to see that. We will still think what they do is good. And on the other hand, a person that we don't really like, whatever they do, we will see that as a fault. Even if they actually are not really making a mistake, whether or not they're making a mistake, it doesn't really matter. Whatever they do, whatever they say, we think it's a mistake and it's a fault. It's because we don't like them. And that's because of self-grasping. And because of self-grasping, there's an aversion against them. And so therefore, we see the fault in whatever they say and whatever they do. And so in this way, our own thoughts of attachment and aversion increase. And due to that, then we create all kinds of conflict. Many faults arise from that. And that is why we kind of carry with us all these faults all the time. And so, so first, so that's what we need to see first, yeah. That the way these things appear. So first, the reason why we see a person a certain way is because in the first place, there was a resentment against them already. We already didn't like them. So that's prior to seeing their fault. And then you're unable to see any good quality in them. So instead of doing that, we should rather look at our own mind, our own faults. So this is how we develop a mind of equanimity. So we all now we are unable to see the fault. If we of course, if we know that there is a fault, then there's no one who doesn't want to abandon it. We want to abandon the fault, but we can't really actually see our own fault, and so therefore, because you're normally not conditioned to taking this look at ourselves, and so basically we see things in a rather distorted way. And for example, it's like looking at a white conch shell. A person who has clear eyesight, has nothing wrong with their eyes, sees that as a white conch. But a person that has jaundice, a disease, they will see the white conch as a yellow conch. But that doesn't make the conch yellow, it's still white. But it's because that the person just sees it yellow because the person has an impairment in their eyes. And so this is how we see things. This is how we see our friends, our companions, in this very distorted way, seeing their faults and so on, and not seeing our own faults. And so, and on the other hand, let's say you see the fault in somebody else. Let's say they have that fault. Even if they have that fault, still, actually, Dorzin Rinpoche always mentions that he mentioned that so many times. He mentioned that often, that even if the other person has that fault, if you think, or they have that fault and what they're doing is bad, is wrong, the mere fact that you think that way, that is what harms you. That is what obscures your mind. That is what obscures your love, your kindness. That is what obscures your wisdom. So in equanimity, this needs to be sent away, like this word Dangyam says, this needs to be sent away, these negative thoughts, these critical thoughts about others. Because if we don't send them away, then the negative thoughts about others will not dissolve. And as long as they are in our mind, there is no way that the four immeasurables can arise in our mind. And actually also today, Dorzin Rinpoche also spoke about mindfulness and a state of non-distraction. And so regarding that, we can understand that point, but then when we see a person that has a fault, then immediately our mind goes there and we think about, this is a fault. So instead of that, if you're mindful, then immediately you would actually look inside. Instead of looking at the other person, you would look at your own mind and purify your own mind of your own flaws. If you're unmindful, then you would just directly follow that thought. And this is how we kind of go in circles, following our thoughts of attachment and aversion. In a text called the Madhyamakavatara, or Entering the Middle Way, it says, so first, there is an attachment, a clinging to the self, which leads to the perception of others, and then an attachment to those on your side, and an aversion against the other, and tossed around by these thoughts of attachment and aversion. This is really what makes us wander in samsara, this cyclic existence. And this is how we never find any happiness. Even in this life, of course, we won't create happiness for future lives in this way. But even in this life, if you're constantly tied down by these thoughts of attachment and aversion, then even in this life, we will just always be unhappy and kind of in a miserable state. And so that's why it's so really important to make an effort to abandon it. So of the four immeasurables, if we want to cultivate a mind of immeasurable equanimity, that is, if you want to see the nature of the mind, You have to pacify these confused perception. So when really an equanimity, a real equanimity arises in yourself, that is when you will see the nature of the mind. And if it does not arise, then we wander in samsara, because we are confused. We follow our confused, deluded perceptions, not recognizing that all of these are delusions. Not recognizing confusion or delusion, we follow it. So that means, for example, we label by saying, oh, something is good, this is good, and this is bad. We divide everything into two. It is good and bad, and so forth. And then we believe that our statements are true, our views are true. And so we hold on to them. So in order to develop equanimity, so therefore the first step is we need to understand that we are confused. So if you want to see the nature of the mind, first of all, you have to know that you're confused. You have to see the delusion. There's actually, it can be understood very easily. There's one example that maybe shows that easily. So for example, if you have a friend who's very close to you, so you're very close friends. So then tomorrow something happens, and now all of a sudden he's not your friend anymore. Then now he's a bad person. So actually what happened here is the person is still the same. It's not suddenly a different person, still the same person, but what changed is your mind, your perception of that person. So this is how you can recognize confusion or delusion. It is that your inherent kind of a natural, your tendency to label something like as good or inherently bad, and to be certain about that. This is good and this is bad. So thinking that something is good is confusion, and thinking that something is bad is also confusion. And so the mind is confused, following these confused dualistic thoughts of good and bad, attachment and aversion. And that's why we don't see the nature of the mind. So actually, ultimately, from the nature of mind, these labels, a goodness or something negative about something, does not actually really exist. It is just our own perception of something. So it is just we don't understand that this is only our own perception. We don't understand this is confusion. We think that this is how it really is. And that's why we follow our confusion. And following our confusion, we wander in samsara. And that's why we are not able to destroy our confusion right away. And of course, it's difficult to destroy confusion right away. So how can we go about it? So you can reflect and think that, so now I have found the precious human body. And that's really incredible, because as a human being, I am able to recognize confusion. I am able to not follow my confusions and recognize my thoughts of attachment and aversion. And I can make an effort to eliminate these negativities of body, speech, and mind. So for example, the precious human body is like a golden, like a chest, like a box. So it's very precious, very valuable. But then if you fill it with trash, then it basically becomes a trash box, isn't it? On the other hand, if you fill your golden box with jewels, gems, then it is a jewel box. It was meant to be. So then it's jewel outside and jewels inside. So this is how we should use a precious human body, which is like a jewel box. We use it when we practice the holy dharma, when we understand that our real precious gem is the mind of love and compassion and the altruistic mind. So if you make an effort to cultivate these qualities, then you have made your human existence meaningful. So otherwise, normally, for example, in the morning when we wake up, we already feel a little afflicted. We feel like a little prideful or angry or jealous or competitive. So we go about our day in an afflicted way already. And doing that actually is similar to filling your jewel box with trash. And so if you see somebody who has a very expensive, nice jewel box and they fill it with trash, what do you think of that person? You think that person is a little stupid, don't you? Because why would somebody smart really fill something so precious with trash? So it's quite similar from the perspective of the bodhisattvas, actually. They really see this precious human body as like this jewel box. So if you would use it to just only engage in negative actions your entire life, then you really actually have misused this life, abused your life, because the body that you have is just temporary. Therefore, don't cling too much to your thoughts of attachment and aversion, because one day you will leave this body behind, but you will not leave your karmas behind. Karma will continue on just like a flowing river, flowing water, just keeps flowing to the next life. Therefore, make an effort in using this precious human life for something meaningful, to practice virtue, and not following the thoughts of attachment and aversion. And recognize that these thoughts are mistaken, they are delusion, and they don't actually inherently exist. In the 37 Bodhisattva practices, this is explained in very simple terms. It says, appearances are one's own mind, or the way things appear is your own mind. So these thoughts of this is good, this is bad, this is all a fabrication of your own mind. There is nothing that possesses an inherently good or bad existence. And so then that verse continues. So appearances are one's own mind. From the beginning, mind's nature is free from the extremes of elaboration. So being free from elaboration, that is the mind of great equanimity. It is the mind that is free from all concept labeling of good and bad, or subject and object, and happiness and suffering, and so on. All of these dissolve in the natural state of the mind. And so being entirely free from mental elaborations, therefore not to engage the mind in subject-object duality, is the Bodhisattva's practice. So this actually sums it up. And so recognize when you're confused, I am confused. Actually, what I'm thinking, what I'm believing does not inherently exist. So if you recognize that, there is no real inherently existing subject and object and good and bad and so forth in the mind. And then when you recognize that, then these dualistic thoughts will disappear. So basically they disappear if you don't follow them. And then you realize the natural state of the mind that transcends duality. And that is the mind of, that is based on this mind of equanimity. And so that's why it is the Bodhisattva's activity to not grasp, not cling to a duality, to not think in a dualistic way. They always abide in a state of great equanimity. And so in any case, now I have explained this to you to the best of my abilities. So we should try to do our best to make an effort to cultivate such a peaceful state of mind, of equanimity. So for today, we stop the teachings here.